Hello everyone, in this video we are going to talk about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. To know why it's happening and how it all began, we need to look at its history. So let us begin. Before the World War I, Israel-Palestinian area was under the control of Ottoman Empire. But post the war, it came under the control of British and was called as the British Mandate for Palestinian. The composition of this area consisted of Jews in the minority and the Arabs in the majority. Meanwhile, due to Hitler's suppression and its Holocaust, more number of Jews started moving in this area, and this disappointed the Arabs and led to the Arab Revolt in 1936 to 1939 against the British, who supported the Jews with the ideology of Zionism, which means that they wanted a separate and independent state. Looking at the unsettled situation in the country, the Britishers handed the British Mandate of Palestinian to the UN and let them decide its future. So, in 1947, the United Nations adopted the Resolution 181, known as the Partition Plan, which sought to divide the area into two parts. One for the Arabs, called the Palestine, and the other for the Jews, called the Israel. The Palestine consisted of the 45% of the area, and the rest 55% was designated to Israel. Both Jews and Arabs weren't happy with it, but Israel accepted it and became an independent country on May 1948. Another reason for the Arabs' disappointment was that they were in more number, but the share of land was less. This led to the war between the Arab countries and Israel in 1948. In this war, initially Israel was losing, but ended up occupying 78% of the land in 1949. With an end to this war, around 750,000 Palestinians were displaced and the territory was divided into three parts. Israel remained the same, but Palestine was divided into two: the West Bank, which was under control of Jordan, and the Gaza, that was under control of the Egypt. Although the David Accords improved Israel's relation with its neighbors, the internal situation of Israel remained unresolved and unsettled. In 1987, hundreds and thousands of Palestinians living in Gaza Strip and West Bank rose up against the Israeli government, which is known as the First Intifada. In 1993, Oslo I Accords allowed Palestinians to govern themselves in the West Bank and the Gaza. In 1995, Oslo's Second Accords added provision that mandated complete withdrawal of Israel from 6 cities and 450 towns in the West Bank. In 2000, the Palestinians led the Second Intifada, which lasted until 2005 when their leader Arafat died. Meanwhile, in 2006, the Hamas, which is declared as a terrorist group by the United States, won the election in Gaza, and the West Bank was under the control of the Fatah in collaboration with Palestinian Liberation Organization. In the summer of 2014, clashes in Palestinian territory precipitated a military confrontation between the Israeli military and Hamas, in which Hamas fired nearly 3,000 rockets at Israel, and Israel retaliated with a major offensive in Gaza. This ended in August of 2014 with 73 Israelis and 2,251 Palestinians being killed. After a wave of violence between Israelis and Palestinians in 2015, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas announced that Palestinians would no longer be bound by the territorial divisions created by the Oslo Accords. In March and May of 2018, Palestinians in the Gaza Strip conducted weekly demonstrations at the border between the Gaza Strip and Israel. The final protest coincided with the 70th anniversary of Nakba, the Palestinian exodus that accompanied Israeli independence. While most of the protesters were peaceful, some stormed the perimeter fence and threw rocks and other objects. According to United Nations, 183 demonstrators were killed and more than 6,000 were wounded by ammunition. Also, in May of 2018, fighting broke out between Hamas and the Israeli military in what became the worst period of violence since 2014. Before reaching a ceasefire, militants in Gaza fired over 100 rockets into Israel. Israel responded with strikes on more than 50 targets in Gaza during the 24-hour flare-up. The Trump administration cancelled funding for the UN Relief and Work Agency, which provides aid to Palestinian refugees, and relocated the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a reversal of long-standing US policy. The decision to move the US Embassy was met with applause from the Israeli leadership, but was condemned by Palestinian leaders and others in the Middle East and Europe. Israel considers the complete and united Jerusalem its capital, while Palestinians claim East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state. In January 2020, the Trump administration released its long-awaited Peace to Prosperity plan, which was rejected by the Palestinians due to its support for future Israeli annexation of settlements in the West Bank and control over an undivided Jerusalem. So this was the history of Israel and Palestinian conflict. Now let us come back to the present situation. In October 2020, an Israeli court ruled that several Palestinian families living in Sheikh Jarrah, a neighborhood in East Jerusalem, were to be evicted by May 2021, with their land handed over to Jewish families. In February 2021, several Palestinian families from Sheikh Jarrah filed an appeal to the court, ruling and prompted protests around the appeal hearings, an ongoing legal battle around property ownership, and demanding an end to the forcible displacement of Palestinians from their home in Jerusalem. In late April 2021, Palestinians began demonstrating in streets of Jerusalem to protest the pending evictions, and residents of Sheikh Jarrah, along with other activists, began to host nightly sit-ins. In early May, after a court ruled in favor of the evictions, the protest expanded, with Israeli police deploying forces against demonstrators. On May 7, following weeks of daily demonstrations and rising tensions between protesters, Israeli settlers and police during the month of Ramadan, violence broke out at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem, with Israeli police using stun grenade, rubber bullets, and water cannons in clash with protesters that left hundreds of Palestinians wounded. After the clashes in Jerusalem's old city, tension increased throughout East Jerusalem, compounded by the celebration of Jerusalem Day. On May 10, after several consecutive days of violence throughout Jerusalem and the use of lethal and non-lethal forces by Israeli police, Hamas, the militant group which governs Gaza, and other Palestinian militant groups launched hundreds of rockets into Israeli territory. Israel responded with airstrikes and later artillery bombardments against targets in Gaza, including launching several airstrikes that killed more than 20 Palestinians. While claiming to target Hamas, other militants, and their infrastructure, including tunnels and rocket launchers, Israel has expanded its aerial campaign and struck targets including residential buildings, media headquarters, and refugees and healthcare facilities. Since the violence escalated in mid-May 2021, more than 200 Palestinians and at least 10 Israelis have been killed so far, with hundreds more wounded. Mob violence and reprisal attacks in cities across Israel have raised concern of violent escalation in other territories. Despite international support for a ceasefire, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has started his intention to continue military operations in Gaza. So, this was the complete history of Israel-Palestinian conflict and the present-day situation. Hope you like it. Thank you.